I shall basically speak on three broad aspects here. One is, why is India in the state it finds itself today in terms of the availability and supply and coverage of vaccines for its population? The second point that I would like to deal with is how this policy in India basically contributes to enriching two private vaccine companies, allowing them to make super profits in the midst of the pandemic. The third point that I would like to make is why India needs free and universal vaccination. And in the midst of all this, I shall also refer to this whole discussion related to intellectual property rights and why the absence of intellectual property waivers contribute to the kind of situation that India finds itself in today. So let me come to the first point, the flawed planning for vaccines in India. India's vaccine planning was flawed, poorly planned from day one. Any person with a calculator, a simple calculator in their hands, would actually be able to calculate the demand for vaccines and the supply for vaccines much better than what the government of India did. What is the situation here? India has a population of about 138 crore, that is about 1,380 million. Out of that, currently we are giving only 18 plus population. So take the 18 plus population alone, you will get about 966 million or about 97 crore. One person needs 2 doses, so you'll need about 1,932 million doses, roughly 2,000 million doses, or about 2 billion doses. Let's say that India is a large country and we need to give it a full year for covering its entire population, 18 plus population. That means that India would require about 161 million doses per month. Okay, only then it can cover the whole population in 12 months. Or it needs about 5.4 million or 54 lakh doses per day. Only then it will be able to do this. So 54 lakh per day or 5.4 million doses per day is what you should make available if you want to cover your entire population by 12 months. Now, there is another problem here, which is that all of the vaccine production in India cannot be used for internal consumption. This is because Indian companies like Serum Institute of India have international commitments, both export commitments to commercial export commitments to firms like AstraZeneca in the UK. India also has a scheme called Vaccine Maitri, whereby it provides a lot of developing countries with vaccines. It also has to contribute to the United Nations Gavi program of vaccines. So all these things have to be diverted a little bit. So about 15% of the total production will have to be diverted to these international commitments. So you'll have to produce a little more by about 10 to 15%. So this is the broad situation with respect to demand. You have to come now to the supply side. In terms of supply or availability, what has happened is that you have the Serum Institute of India, which has a capacity of about 60 to 70 million doses a month. That's all. By May, it is supposed to go to 100 million doses per month, but that's a different story. But as of certainly now, it is about 60 to 70 million per month. Bharat Biotech, the other company which produces Covaxin, has a capacity of about 6 million doses a month. That's all. Right? So if you add Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech, what you get is you have a total capacity of about 76 million doses a month, or about 2.5 million doses per day. Now, even if I take these promised expansions in capacity of these two firms, which is like waiting for Godot, never happens. Nevertheless, if you take it, you will see that it comes to about only 3.8 million doses per day, 38 lakh doses per day. But that's we have not even now we have not reached that particular number. We are still around 2.3 million per day. So if you add up these two companies and their projected capacity expansions, you still do not exceed 3.8 million doses per day, whereas what you need is about 5.4 million doses per day. Right? And in fact, if you take away exports and other commitments that you have outside India, that 15% that I said, this 38 lakh doses per day, or 3.8 million doses per day, further comes down to about 32 lakh per day, or 3.2 million per day. That's even worse. This the government of India knew very well from day one. It did not do it. It did not do anything to resolve this problem, to match the demand and supply by increasing capacities in India. I think there are three things that the government of India did very wrong with respect to the demand for planning and planning to meet that demand through supplies, given that it very well knew what was happening. The first important point to note here is there was a complete failure to approve the emergency use for what Indian government would call foreign vaccines. Right? It gave permission in January to only two vaccines: Covishield, which is the Indian name for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, and Covaxin, which is an indigenous vaccine of India, developed by the public sector. So if you take these two vaccines, these were called made in India vaccines, and the government, when they gave permission to these vaccines in January, they had basically said that this is emblematic of the success of India's self-reliant or Atmanirbhar program in vaccine development. It also said that with these two vaccines, we will serve the world also. Okay, we will export to different parts of the world. We are the pharmacy of the world, it was claimed. We will become a Vishwa Guru, right? A guru for the world by supplying vaccines to everybody and so on. So a political campaign was launched with respect to the approval given to these two vaccines only, which had so limited production capacity that India is suffering even today. It could have given permission to more vaccines, right? For example, Sputnik V came for permission in February. India said that we will not be able to give you permission because you do not have enough immunogenicity data. But Covishield, when it was approved in January, it also did not have immunogenicity data. Still you gave permission. Still you gave approval. Similarly, Pfizer came. When Pfizer came, they were returned because they were told that you do not have local bridging trials and the data on that. But then when Covaxin was given approval in January, it did not have even phase 3 data. It was given approval with just phase 1 and phase 2 data and not enough phase 3 data. Even now, when I'm speaking to you in May, you still do not have the phase 3 data for Covaxin, but it is being given everywhere. So Pfizer went away. So Indian government's policy was that we need only Indian vaccines and we can manage with that. And why was it done so? It was done to showcase a particular political campaign of the Indian Prime Minister related to Atmanirbharta or self-reliance. And that was it was thought that that would bring enormous amount of political capital to the image of the Indian Prime Minister, which was fledgling across the world thanks to the protests related to farm laws and so on and so forth. So this was the first issue that came up. You did not give enough permission to adequate numbers of vaccines. The second important mistake that India did was in terms of a complete failure to make any at-risk investment in the vaccine companies, their research and development, their capacity expansion, etc., like many other countries did. Take, for example, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Right? 97% of the funding behind Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has come from taxpayers' money in different countries like United Kingdom, United States, European Union, and so on. 97%. Right? Take a vaccine like the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. BioNTech received a grant of about 375 million euros from the German government. It also received an additional debt financing from the European Union worth about 100 million euros. That's how Pfizer's BioNTech vaccine was developed. That was also publicly funded. Take Moderna in the United States. Moderna received more than $2.5 billion assistance as part of Operation Warp Speed from the Trump government. And that's how it developed its vaccine. That is also publicly funded. Now, some of these investments do fail, no doubt about it. You will have to take risks. That's why it's called at-risk investment in vaccine companies. For example, the EU's funding support for Sanofi, which was given for a vaccine, failed. But then that happens. That's why it's called at-risk investment. Vaccine companies take risk, and you will have to, the government will have to come in and reduce their risk exposure. But Indian government did none of this. It made zero investment in either research and development of these vaccine companies or in terms of capacity expansion, more importantly, of these vaccine companies. The only assistance that the Serum Institute of India received was from the Bill Gates Foundation. Nothing else. So this is a second important mistake. No at-risk investments were made in vaccine companies. The third important mistake that the Indian government made was in terms of a complete failure to book advance purchase orders with the vaccine companies. When every country of the world booked vaccines in June 2020 itself, the government of India made the first booking for vaccines only in January of 2021, when many of these vaccine companies had already locked in their production capacities with other commitments that they had to make, other countries, other governments which booked these vaccines and so on. So India got very less. Right? So there was complete mismanagement of the planning for vaccines in India. Not enough vaccines were given permission. You did not make any at-risk investment in any company. You also did not make any necessary advance purchase orders with the vaccine companies. Right? This is the broad failure that India is suffering from today. There was complete mismanagement of vaccine production processes. Come April, there is enormous vaccine shortage that comes up. People are flocking vaccination centers, but there are no vaccines. They are being returned. Vaccination centers are closing down. That's the context in which on 13th April, suddenly the Indian government decides our whole policy was wrong. So we are going to call back everyone who we had returned, Sputnik V, Pfizer, Moderna, everybody, Johnson & Johnson, please come to India, please come to India. We are going to give you emergency approval. But these companies were cool because they didn't want to rush into India, given that they were once returned. Only Sputnik said that it has some dealings with Indian companies, so yes, we'll come. Right? So this was the situation in April, but then the vaccine shortage continued because no company is going to come in. If you give them permission today, nobody is going to come in tomorrow and start giving you vaccines. They will take at least 3 to 4 months to start production and supply. So the first supply from companies like Sputnik V is not likely to come in terms of large consignments. Some trickling in has happened, but in terms of large consignments, they're not going to come before July or August. That's too late. So this is one. Then by 19th of April, the government of India made a very important turn in vaccine policy. And that brings me to the second point that I wanted to deal with in this presentation. On the 19th of April, the government of India liberalized vaccine sales and it deregulated vaccine prices considerably in India. what it did was the following. One, it divided the whole of vaccine production of India into two sets, 50% for the central government and 50% for the state governments and private hospitals. But the second 50%, state governments and private hospitals, will have to be directly purchased by state governments and private hospitals from the vaccine companies. Central government completely withdrew itself from the second 50%. What was it earlier doing? It was for the single purchaser. It was buying everything from the vaccine companies at a regulated price of 150 rupees per dose, and then giving it to states for free, which was giving it to people for free. That was the system. But according to the order of 19th April, with effect from 1st May, this will not be the case. Only the central government's 50% will be bought from the companies at a regulated price and given free to people. The other 50%, state governments will have to pay, or the private companies will have to pay and get it from the vaccine companies directly. At what price? A deregulated price. The 150 that is applicable, rupees 150 per dose applicable to the central government in the first 50% will not be applicable to the second 50%. Vaccine companies can self-set their own price, whatever price they want to charge. So what happened? In just 1 week, vaccine prices rose 3 times, 4 times. 150 rupees per dose was changed by vaccine companies. It became 400 rupees per dose and 600 rupees per dose, and sometimes 1,200 rupees per dose at private hospitals. So there was a 2 to 6 times increase in the vaccine prices. They were raised by vaccine companies in just about a week. And this became a very important turning point in India's vaccine policy. There was a complete neoliberal approach to vaccine policy whereby you completely deregulated. Why did this happen? There's an economics to it, and there was a politics to it. What is the economics to it? The economics to it is the India's vaccine market is essentially a duopoly. Only 2 companies. There is no perfect market. There is no competitive market. Only 2 companies. So it's a duopoly. And what happens here is that given this duopoly, these 2 companies were completely unhappy with the kind of pricing that existed earlier at about 150 rupees per dose. All estimates that I have seen show that the cost of production of vaccines in India is between 30 rupees to 80 rupees per dose. That's all. 30 rupees to 80 rupees per dose. And they were being given a regulated price of 150 rupees per dose, which was already a good profit for them. So a normal profit existed. They should have been happy with it, but they were not. The CEO of Serum Institute of India, Mr. Adar Poonawalla, came on TV and said, I'm looking for super profits, not normal profits, super profits. And how much did he want? 1,000 rupees per dose, he said. He publicly said. The other company, Bharat Biotech, its CEO, Krishna Ella, he came on TV and said, I want the maximum price for my product. This is the guy who, over last year, was in TV interviews showing up a bottle of water, bottled water, and then saying, my vaccine will cost lower than this bottle of water. Now he says, I want maximum price. So basically, the urge for super profits, the disdain for normal profits of these duopolistic companies was there, and the government of India succumbed to this demand for super profits. And it allowed vaccine companies to fix prices as they pleased. So vaccines in one go became completely unaffordably priced for the Indian citizens. This is the economics of it. But there is a politics to it also. What is the politics to it? The politics of it is that there was a vaccine shortage. People were angry, upset. The political capital of the Prime Minister was diminishing. And the government was looking for a political solution to this problem. And this 50-50 solution allowed the central government to pass on the responsibility of negotiating with the vaccine companies and buying it directly from the vaccine companies onto the shoulders of the state governments, so that tomorrow, if there is a shortage of vaccines and there is an outrage among people, the central government can simply say, I don't know, it is the state governments who are in charge. They didn't order properly. They didn't order in time. They did not order in adequate quantity. And that is why there is this problem. Narendra Modi is not the problem. State governments are the problem. You could actually divert the blame from the central government towards state governments. And this ulterior motive, a political motive, was a second important reason why the government shifted gears from the 19th of April. So this had a political economy to it. This also had a politics to it, to protect the positive image of the Prime Minister. This was the second important reason why this happened. There is an additional facet to it, which we have to bring here, because one of the vaccines, which is Covaxin, I mentioned the name of Bharat Biotech, which produces it. It is not a private sector vaccine, though Bharat Biotech is a private company. Covaxin is the product of public sector research in India, just as Oxford University developed AstraZeneca vaccine. The SARS-CoV-2 strain, which is the basis for Covaxin, was actually developed originally, or isolated originally, by the National Institute of Virology in Pune, which is a public sector institution under the Indian Council for Medical Research, ICMR. And ICMR transferred this strain from Bharat Biotech to Bharat Biotech for development and manufacture. So they were the contracted manufacturers only, who also did some clinical trials. So basically, the intellectual property rights of Covaxin, it did not come out for a long time. I wrote an article on it. Others also wrote about it. Finally, the government agreed that the intellectual property rights of Covaxin are not Bharat Biotech's, but they're actually shared by the government of India and Bharat Biotech. That means the government owns half the IP. Then the immediate question arises. If the government owns the intellectual property rights, at least in a huge part of it, why did you allow just one private company to exclusively produce it? Why did you not give give non-exclusive licenses to multiple companies so that it can be mass-produced in the country? The government has not yet given an answer to that. It has allowed this one company to enrich itself with an exclusive license on a product which is essentially a public sector product. Remember when the polio vaccine was developed in 1950s, Jonas Salk was asked, whose vaccine is it? Who does it belong to? Jonas Salk said, it belongs to the people. And then he asked, can you patent the sun? That's the history of vaccine development in this world, right? Belongs to people. They're life-saving equipment. But here there's something that should belong to the people because it's taxpayers' money which funded the development of Covaxin, but it was given to just one private company to enrich itself. There is no answer to that yet. So this is another facet to it. I'll come back to it in a little while, but let me quickly go into the last case of why I think vaccination in India should be free and universal, and let me come back to the IPR problem. So the political economy and the politics of vaccine policy that I described a little while back means that India is the only country probably in the entire world which does not provide vaccination to its people free of cost. And why is free and universal vaccination required? There are many reasons to it. There are at least 6 to 7 reasons I can cite as to why it should be free and universal. The first is the vaccines are not soaps or toothpaste or toothbrushes and so on, right? They are called global public goods. And what is a global public good? A global public good typically means that it should be available universally for everyone and everywhere It should be affordable, it should be safe, it should be effective, and it should be easily administered. This is the definition. And everywhere, countries have figured out. In the United States, you people live in the United States, you know that vaccines are free of cost in the United States. So it is in United Kingdom. So is in Germany, so in France, so in China. Everywhere it is free of cost, except in India. Across the world, countries realize that if you want to make vaccines universally available for everyone, everywhere, affordable, safe, effective, simple to administer, etc., you have to give it free. There's no other way. It is the responsibility of an enlightened welfare state to provide vaccines free of cost. This is not understood in India. Number one. So the reason number one is it is a global public good. Number two is India's constitution provides for right to life under Article 21. And right to health is covered under Article 21 as part of right to life. As a result, right to free vaccines runs as a subset of right to life in Article 21, and as such, right to free vaccine can be construed as a constitutional obligation of the Indian state to its citizens. So it's a constitutional right of citizens to have free vaccines, which the government is now violating. That's number two. Reason number three is vaccine hesitancy. There is enormous vaccine hesitancy. Right? What do we mean by vaccine hesitancy? It primarily happens because of reasons like complacency, overconfidence, etc. Usually these are the reasons given for vaccine hesitancy. But in countries like India, vaccine hesitancy becomes more complex and more acute when the affordability question is also brought into play. People don't find it affordable. I made calculations whereby if you calculated the existing rates at which vaccines are sold or priced, for an agricultural household in India, farmer household in India, half of their monthly income will have to be set aside to vaccinate 2 or 3 adult people in that household. If you take a person standing on the poverty line in India, you will see again about 55 to 60% of that person's monthly income will have to be spent on buying the vaccines. So nobody will go and vaccinate themselves. And that will be a problem, because if some people remain vaccinated, the rich and large numbers of poor people do not remain vaccinated, then the obvious consequence is that you are leaving a large population unprotected, and you are allowing the virus to spread and giving rise to new potential mutants, like, for example, the Indian mutant that you now have. So this is the third reason why you should take out the question of affordability completely out of the equation when vaccine hesitancy comes in. So you should give it free. That should not be a problem why people do not come and vaccinate themselves. Reason number 4, I've already said it. All these vaccines are publicly developed. Oxford, Pfizer, Moderna, Covaxin, all these are. That means the taxpayer has already paid for it. Why would you ask the taxpayer to pay twice? It's like you go and buy something in the shop, you pay for it, come back, the shopkeeper calls you back and says, please pay again. You've already paid through your tax. So that primarily means it's a 4th reason why vaccination should be free. And the 5th reason is that there is enormous financial burden on states. Because if you ask states to buy it, states will simply divert the money that is already being spent on ventilators, oxygen, hospital beds, ICUs, etc. They'll simply divert that money to buy vaccines. That means that investment will suffer. So it's appropriate that the central government purchases the whole thing and gives it to the people. Why is it? Because if the central government buys it, I've calculated, it costs only 0.2% of the GDP of India for the central government to buy all vaccines and give it to the states. It will be bulk purchase. It can be bargained at a regulated price. But here what you have done, you ask the states to go and buy it who cannot afford it. That's another reason. The last reason is it is easy to administer. Look, what you have done here is, instead of having a unified systematic market for vaccines, you have ended up fragmenting the vaccine markets in India. One price for central government, one price for state governments, one price for private hospitals. So there is competition between states, there is competition between states and private hospitals, there is competition between private hospitals and private hospitals. Why all this competition unnecessarily, which ends up wasting enormous amount of money, time, and effort? Have a unified market. The central government purchases solely, becomes a single purchaser and gives it to people. Why not? That's the model followed in every other country, including the United States, but not in India. Because so easy to administer is very important in vaccine universalization of vaccine coverage, and there again it becomes important that there is a single procurer and free vaccination. So all these reasons are there for free and universal vaccination, but India is completely out of the play here. Now let me end my initial comments with one point, which is the whole discussion related to IPRs. Now, India has made a demand in the World Trade Organization, along with South Africa, that IPRs on vaccines should be waived. And that's a positive demand. That's a good demand, correct demand, because vaccine, what happens here is across the world, because vaccines are developed through public investment over a period of time, these public investments become instruments for private profiteering, right? So once the government makes the investment, then the IPR is for the company, and then the company starts to make profits from it. And that's not quite desirable, socially desirable. Public investment has gone in, so it should belong to the people. So in case of drugs, we saw in the AIDS drug, if IPRs remained in the case of AIDS drugs, the world would not have gotten rid of the AIDS epidemic even now. It's because an Indian company called Cipla reverse engineered the product and produced it in India and sold back at cheap prices to African countries. That's why Africa was able to control AIDS. Look at different cancer drugs. Look at the Ebola drugs. All of them happened because countries like India and South Africa were able to produce it without constraints of IPR. It should hold for COVID vaccines also. And there, what you are doing is you have ended up monopolizing knowledge, right? You have ended up enclosing knowledge. You have commodified knowledge. Knowledge is not a tangible. Knowledge is not a soap or washing powder, right? Knowledge is not a tangible. It's intangible, and you have commodified the intangible. So as a result, you have excluded those other than the rights holders from access or use. You want open science, but you have gated science. That's a problem. As a result, what has happened today? Because different countries and different companies have kept their IPRs, more than 80% of the world's vaccines today have gone to people in high-income countries. And only 0.3% of vaccines have gone to people living in low-income countries. That's the kind of vaccine inequity that you see across the world. Only 0.3% has gone to people living in low-income countries. This is why waiving of the IPR is very important. It doesn't end, the problem doesn't end there. You also have to give technical know-how, etc., etc. So that's a positive demand. And the United States agreeing to it is a good thing, though I think the United States is not at all genuine or sincere or honest in making that decision, because basically it has said that we will be open to text-based negotiations, which are complex. So consensus has to be developed. It will take time. So basically it has said that it will take a lot of time. And I do not think a decision will be taken by WTO on this before 2023. As we know, in the long run, we are all dead. What is the point in taking a decision by 2023? We need a decision today, tomorrow. In that sense, I do not see the American decision as honest. Also because European Union, Switzerland, all of them have to now agree. They have not agreed as yet. So that problem remains. But in the Indian case, what is the issue here is this is not, in my view, it is not quite applicable to India, because India has demanded this in the WTO, but it has not implemented it domestically. The government is sitting on an IPR for one vaccine called Covaxin, but it has not yet allowed anybody to produce it other than this one company called Bharat Biotech. So there is a contradiction between what the government is saying in WTO and what the government is doing internally. It has an IPR. No WTO will come and create a problem if you tomorrow decide to mass produce or open license Covaxin. Do it. But it is not doing it. So this is another important facet of it. The IPR problem is important. It is a good thing that IPR should be waived, but the Indian case is different because the Indian requirements, the Indian situation is such that you do not need an IPR waiver to do what the government should be doing. Right? So this is what I wanted to say broadly, friends. One, that Indian policy on vaccine planning for vaccines was completely poorly planned and administered. Second, Indian vaccine policy has taken a complete neoliberal turn after April 19th, because of which you have deregulated vaccine prices, allowed vaccine companies to make super profits, and kept vaccines completely unaffordable for the people in the country. Number three, all this is done while the requirement or the need is for free and universal vaccination in this country. And number four, the whole discussion on IPRs from the government of India appears dishonest because it is sitting on an IPR of Covaxin, not giving open licenses to mass produce it, and yet is pontificating to the world as to why IPRs should be waived. But no doubt about it, we are all in agreement that IPRs on vaccines should go wherever they are being implemented in the world or in India. They have no place in the midst of the pandemic. There is no room for profiteering in the midst of the pandemic. Vaccines belong to people, and it should belong to the people. Thank you. That's my opening remarks. I'll be happy for a discussion.